Daniel had lived alone on his ranch for so many years that silence had become part of his daily life. The open fields, the horses, the wind moving through the tall grass, these were the only voices he heard. He woke before sunrise every day, made a simple breakfast, checked the fences, fed the animals, and repaired anything that needed fixing. His days were long but calm, and his nights were quiet. Almost too quiet. He had lost his family long ago, and although time had softened the pain, the loneliness still lived quietly in his heart. He tried not to think about it, but the empty chairs at his table always reminded him. One cold evening, while riding back after checking his cattle near the far side of his land, Daniel saw something unusual near an old dry creek bed. A figure, thin, shaking slightly, stood alone as the wind pushed dust around her feet. At first, he thought it might be a traveler in trouble or someone searching for shelter. But as he rode closer, he realized the person was a woman. Her clothes were worn, her hair tangled, and her face looked tired, as if she had not slept or eaten properly for days. He slowed his horse and approached carefully so he wouldn't startle her. She lifted her head, and for a moment, their eyes met. Her eyes carried a deep sadness, something so heavy that Daniel felt it before she even said a word. She looked like someone who had lost everything. She whispered her name, Nalin. Her voice was weak, almost lost in the wind. She said she was an Apache widow who had recently lost her husband during a conflict between two Apache groups. She had no family left, no protection, and no place to go. The wilderness was too dangerous for a woman alone, and the nearest Apache community was far away. Then she said something that made Daniel freeze. "Take me as your wife, or let me die." Her words were not said with anger or madness. They came from deep fear, deep hopelessness. She didn't say them to force anything on him. She said them because she believed she had no other path left. She believed her life had no value without someone to stand beside her. The grief she carried was too heavy for one heart to bear alone. Daniel did not know what to say at first. He carefully stepped off his horse and stood in front of her. He saw how her hands trembled and how she tried to stay strong, even though she looked like she might fall over at any moment. He understood she was not begging for marriage out of love or desire. She was begging for safety, for survival. He gently told her she didn't need to die, and she didn't need to force herself into something like marriage just to stay alive. He asked her to come with him to the ranch. He promised her a warm meal, a safe place to rest, and time to heal. Nalin hesitated, unsure if she should trust him, but the kindness in his eyes gave her enough strength to nod. Daniel helped her onto his horse and slowly escorted her back to the ranch. She looked around quietly as they rode, as if seeing the world through tired eyes. When they reached the ranch, Daniel guided her inside and offered her food. She ate slowly, carefully, like someone who wasn't used to comfort anymore. Daniel gave her a blanket and showed her a small room where she could stay. For the first time in days, Nalin slept without fear. Over the next morning, Daniel found her sitting outside, staring at the horizon. She looked calmer, but still carried the weight of her grief. She thanked him for sheltering her, and she insisted on helping with small chores so she wouldn't feel useless. She swept the porch, washed dishes, and helped feed the chickens. Daniel told her she didn't need to work, but she smiled gently and said she wanted to give something back. Days passed, and slowly, Daniel began to understand Nalin's pain. At night, she often stood outside looking up at the sky. Sometimes, she spoke softly, as if talking to someone who was no longer there. Daniel never interrupted those moments. He knew she was speaking to her husband in her heart. The loss she carried was deep, and he respected that. Nalin, in turn, began to understand Daniel too. She noticed how he worked with quiet dedication. She saw how he repaired things around the ranch, cared for the animals, and kept everything running smoothly. She saw the loneliness in him, the silence that followed him even during the busiest hours of the day. She learned that he had once had a family, but tragedy had taken them from him. Two people who knew pain from different paths were slowly learning to share a small part of life together. One afternoon, Nalin told him she had expected to be turned away the night she met him. She said she had been ready to give up on life because she believed no one would help an Apache woman. She believed people would treat her as a burden or a danger. But Daniel had not done any of that. He had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return. She looked at him with a softness that surprised even herself. As the weeks moved on, a quiet bond formed between them. They did not speak much about their pasts, but their actions showed trust. Nalin would bring him water when he worked in the heat. Daniel would make sure she never felt unsafe or alone on the ranch. They shared meals at the same table, and although they didn't talk constantly, the silence between them slowly changed. It was no longer empty, it was peaceful. But soon, the town began to notice Nalin's presence. When she went with Daniel to buy supplies in town, people stared. Some whispered. Some frowned. A few asked Daniel why he was letting an Apache woman stay with him. Some even hinted that he should send her away to avoid problems. Nalin heard those whispers. They cut her. Deeply. She felt like she was a storm in Daniel's calm life. When they returned to the ranch, she stayed unusually quiet. Daniel asked her what was wrong, and she finally told him she did not want to bring trouble into his world. She said she would leave the next morning, so he could live without the community turning against him. Daniel felt something twist inside him when she said that. He told her she did not need to go anywhere. He told her that her life mattered, that she deserved safety, and that he would not let anyone treat her badly. He said he didn't care what others thought. He only cared that she stayed safe and alive. His words made Nalin's eyes fill with tears she had been holding back for weeks. For the first time, she let herself cry in front of someone. She apologized for being a burden. Daniel shook his head gently and told her she was not a burden. She was a human being who needed help, and he had chosen to help because he believed it was the right thing to do. In that moment, she touched his hand, something she had never done before. And he held her hand, softly in return. That single touch felt like two lonely hearts finding a small place where they finally belonged. As the sun set behind the ranch that evening, Nalin felt a quiet warmth inside her, a feeling she thought she would never feel again. Safety. Daniel watched her as she looked around the ranch yard, and he realized that her presence brought something to his life he didn't even know he was missing. Her calm voice, her careful footsteps, the gentle way she worked these small things made the ranch feel less empty. Part 1 closes with Nalin sitting on the porch, watching the sky turn golden, feeling safe for the first time in a long time. And Daniel, standing a few steps behind her, realizes that this quiet woman with a broken heart has already filled his home with a soft peace he never expected. Life on the ranch slowly settled into a warm and peaceful rhythm for both Daniel and Nalin. Each morning, the rising sun brought a fresh start, and every evening brought a gentle quiet that wrapped around them like a soft blanket. Nalin no longer woke from nightmares or cried silently into the night. She woke early, helped feed the chickens, swept the porch, and made simple meals that filled the house with warmth. Daniel watched her becoming comfortable with each passing day, and seeing her find calm again filled him with quiet relief. Daniel had always been a hard-working man, but now his days felt different. When he rode out to check the cattle, he found himself thinking about what Nalin might be doing back at the ranch. Would she be tending the garden, collecting eggs, teaching the young horse to stay calm? These small thoughts made him smile without realizing it. Nalin also began waiting for him to return each day, sometimes standing outside when the sun was low, her hands gently folded as she looked toward the horizon. She would relax only when she saw him riding back safely. But trouble did not stay away forever. One afternoon, as Daniel was repairing a broken fence near the barn, two men from town arrived on horseback. Their faces were tense, their eyes sharp. They didn't greet him politely. Instead, they demanded to know why an Apache woman was living on his ranch. They claimed they had seen someone who looked like her near the supply store weeks ago and accused her of stealing food. Daniel immediately told them they were mistaken, that Nalin would never steal from anyone. But the men ignored him and pushed to know where she was. Nalin heard voices from inside the house and stepped outside carefully. When the men saw her, they moved closer in a threatening manner, insisting that Daniel hand her over so the town could deal with her. Daniel stepped between them without hesitation. He told them firmly that Nalin had done nothing wrong, that she was under his protection, and that they had no right to come onto his land and make such demands. The men grew angrier, but Daniel's calm strength made them back down. They warned him that helping her would cause trouble, and then rode away. When they left, Nalin was trembling. She had seen men like that before, people who judged her without knowing anything about her. People who saw her as nothing but a problem. She felt her whole world shake again. She sat on the porch with her hands pressed together, trying to keep her fear from overwhelming her. Daniel sat beside her, telling her she was safe and that he wouldn't let anyone harm her. But she couldn't stop crying quietly, trying to hide her face. That night, long after Daniel had gone inside, Nalin remained outside, sitting under the stars. The cold wind brushed against her face, but she didn't move. When Daniel came out to check on her, she spoke softly, her voice carrying the same pain she had shown on the first day he met her. She said she didn't want to bring danger or conflict to his home. She said she thought she should leave to protect him, even if leaving meant she had nowhere to go. Daniel sat beside her, his elbows on his knees, looking at the dark horizon. He told her that she did not bring danger into his life, people's ignorance did. He said he would rather face trouble with her here than live alone again in silence. Nalin turned to him with tears in her eyes, and her voice cracked when she whispered the words she had once spoken in despair. "Take me as your wife, or let me die." But this time, her words were not filled with hopelessness or fear. They were filled with feeling, with a deep wish to stay by his side. She said that being his wife would mean she belonged in this home without shame, without people questioning her presence. She said she wanted a place where she could stand proudly, not hide in fear. She wanted to choose life, not give up on it. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Her face was gentle in the moonlight, and he could see the sincerity in her eyes. He knew she wasn't asking him to save her life. She was asking him to share it with her. He told her that he never wanted her to feel forced into anything. He wanted her to stay because she chose to stay, not because she feared the world outside. She reached out and touched his arm lightly, and her touch felt like a promise she didn't yet know how to put into words. The next morning, Daniel rode into town alone to settle things. He confronted the men who had come to the ranch and told them clearly that Nalin lived with him under his care, and anyone who tried to harm her would have to answer to him. His calm but firm presence made it clear he wasn't backing down. Some people in town were surprised by his bravery. Others were annoyed. But Daniel did not care. He had made his decision. When he returned home, Nalin ran out the moment she heard the horse. She looked worried, but when she saw him unharmed, her face softened with relief. He told her everything he had said to the men and how he had stood his ground. She listened quietly, her hands trembling with emotion. For someone who had lived most of her life without protection or safety, hearing that someone had spoken for her with strength made her eyes fill again. But this time, the tears were soft, full of gratitude. The following days brought small changes. A few people from town began speaking more kindly to Daniel, accepting Nalin's presence since they saw she was not causing any trouble. Some even admired how hardworking she was. She began helping an elderly woman in town carry water. She taught 2 young children how to weave simple patterns using grass. Slowly, her gentle nature warmed people around her. While not everyone accepted her, Enough of them began seeing her as a person with kindness and dignity. Nalin herself began to change too. She laughed more. Her eyes, once clouded with sadness, began to shine with small sparks of hope. She picked wildflowers to decorate the home. She made meals that Daniel enjoyed, and she would sometimes hum soft tunes from her childhood while she worked. Daniel found himself listening quietly, thinking her voice was the most peaceful sound he had heard in years. As for Daniel, his heart slowly opened in ways he had not expected. He found himself looking forward to seeing her smile in the mornings. He noticed how she always tried to make his day easier. He realized he was no longer just helping a widow in need. He was growing close to someone who brought warmth into his lonely life. One evening, as the sun set in a gentle orange glow, Daniel and Nalin stood near the corral, watching the horses graze. The sky stretched wide and peaceful above them. Daniel took a slow breath and finally said the words he had been holding in his heart. He asked her to be his wife. This time, Nalin didn't cry from fear or sorrow. She covered her mouth with shaking hands. Overwhelmed by happiness she never thought she would feel again. She nodded, unable to speak at first. When she found her voice, she said she would stand by him with her whole heart. Their wedding was simple. A few friends from town came, including the elderly woman Nalin had helped and the children who admired her. Daniel stood tall and proud, and Nalin wore a simple dress she had sewn herself. They spoke quiet promises to each other, promises built on kindness, trust, and respect. When they held hands, it felt like two lives finally coming together after long journeys of pain and loneliness. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch as husband and wife. Nalin looked at the home that had once been strange and distant, and now it felt like the place her heart had been searching for. Daniel looked at her with soft eyes, grateful that fate had brought her to him in such an unexpected way. The ranch no longer felt silent. It felt alive with laughter, shared meals, small conversations, and the peaceful presence of two people who had finally found comfort. Nalin found safety and love without losing her dignity. Daniel found companionship and warmth after years of emptiness. Their days became full of gentle moments, working side by side, sharing stories, caring for the animals, and watching the stars together at night. Their love grew naturally, quietly, and beautifully. And so, the story ends not with grand events, but with the simple strength of two hearts choosing each other, healing each other, and building a life filled with peace and hope.